Hi guys, this is Jan with ProcPulse, and today let's do something a bit different, and that something is a Q&A session. Let's dive in. So as you probably know if you watch this channel, stuff has been going on in the region quite a lot. We've had a general election in Czechia recently. Democracy is basically being destroyed every single day in Slovakia. Stuff is always crazy down in Hungary, and also there's been a new president in Poland. So I thought, why not ask you, my beloved audience, what you'd like to know about what's been going on in the region, and I will try to answer those questions for you. Now, fortunately, there's been a number of really interesting and deep questions that came my way, so I'm going to go over them today with you. Just bear with me because I don't think that there's a correct answer to any of those questions. It's going to be basically a brainstorming together with you. And that also means that whenever you feel that I've said something that doesn't make any sense or that you disagree with, you want to add something important, feel free to do that and drop anything you feel like sharing down in the comments. I'll make sure to read it all and continue the discussion down there with you. That said, let's do the first question together. There is much talk about a lack of leadership in the EU at the moment. Macron and Tusk are domestically weakened, and Merz doesn't seem to care about Europe too much. Do you think that this could open the opportunity for smaller member states like Czechia to set the agenda? Now, this is a really interesting question, and I think it goes well deep into what's been going on. And you are definitely right in saying that the traditional engine of Europe, so to speak, has been quite weakened. We've had Macron in France, who's basically had a new government every other week and has been fighting for his political survival. We have Le Pen basically waiting to replace him in power as soon as she possibly can. And in Germany, Friedrich Merz, I don't really think that he's that interested in the EU at the moment, because Germany, as the traditional engine, so to speak, of the EU, has been struggling quite a lot. The engine is basically stalled right now, and his main concern, quite logically from his perspective, I think, is to restart the economy in Germany. So that's one thing. And secondly, I can't see him pushing any sort of a grandiose integration project at the EU level. Macron did try to push integration projects that seemed ambitious, but as I said, he's so busy with domestic shit at the moment that he doesn't have any time or energy to come back to those projects. So those two are basically out of the picture because they're too busy with domestic issues at the moment. And yes, you are correct. That could hypothetically open the door for smaller member states like Czechia or Poland, which is not small, but still, not the traditional engine of Europe, to take over the reins. But I think that kind of misses the point because, let's face it, member states like Czechia or even Poland, at least at the moment, will not be able to replace the economic engine of the EU, that is Germany and partly France, because they just don't have the wherewithal to do that at the moment. But what could happen instead is that those member states could replace them or step in certain really specific agenda points that are relevant for them. As an example, let's take the so-called ammunition initiative that Czechia launched. I think it's been over a year now, to support ammunition flows to Ukraine. Very simply put, Czechia has been acting as the interlocutor, as the coordinator of the aid going toward Ukraine. It's been collecting money from many different allies in the EU and NATO, collecting money and using that money to buy ammunition in non-EU member states, and then acting as the central point that then sends the ammunition to Ukraine. And in that specific case, Czechia has been using the unique contacts that it's collected over the years to help Ukraine quite literally survive on the battlefield. This is not about money. This is just about the capability. And in this particular case, the Czech capability, so that of the smaller member states, was simply larger than the capability of a larger, more traditional member state would have been. So yes, to answer that question, on a specific agenda item, I think the inability of Germany or France to act on the international stage can open the door, but I just don't see them replacing Germany or France fully just because they don't have the means to do so at the moment. That said, I want to add one last thing before I move to the other question, to the second question, and that is Poland and its military capabilities. We've discussed it on Prague Pulse already. Poland has been building a really large, formidable military force. I quite personally think that one day we'll be happy to have Poland defending us on the eastern flank, because Poland has been taking the Russian threat seriously, much more seriously than the so-called traditional EU member states. Just look at the south. Countries like Spain or Portugal, for many reasons, have been largely ignoring the threats from Russia, whereas Poland has been quite literally at the forefront. The military is becoming one of the largest and most capable in Europe, but it also needs to be said that Donald Tusk over in Poland has been busy domestically with his own issues as well. You'll know if you watch Prague Pulse that he's basically been fighting a 24/7 knife fight with the PIS, now in opposition, but still very strong. And the new Polish president, Karol Nawrocki, also affiliated with the PIS, has been an ideological enemy of Tusk. So let's see what happens. You'll know that the Polish president has a really strong veto power, due to which nothing substantial can really change in Poland, and Tusk has been preoccupied with steering the domestic agenda as much as he can in the face of that opposition. So let's see what happens. I just wanted to bring that up to say that Poland has been busy as well, but its military is definitely one of the aspects that will be beneficial to all of us one day, I believe. Let's move to the second question. Also really interesting. What is the overall attitude of Czech people toward political stances popularized by Andrej Babiš? Now, again, a really crucial question, a really broad one, so I'll try to make it short. As you know, Andrej Babiš won the recent election in Czechia by a landslide, over 34% of the vote, which is one of the biggest wins in the entire history of Czechia, by the way. So he is the undisputed winner of the election. And to answer why he won by such a large margin, I think the first obvious reason that we have to face, no matter if we like Babiš or not, is that people simply wanted a change. And a lot of people wanted a change, and that's why Babiš won so decisively. A large portion of the population was simply dissatisfied with the outgoing government of Petr Fiala. We could discuss the many reasons why I think that was the case. Just the best example, in my opinion, is the absolute terrible communication strategy that the outgoing government has had. And there is no better demonstration of this than the living cost in Czechia. See, Czechia has actually become one of the most expensive countries in the entire EU to live in over the past, I think, 5 or 7 years. Compared to real wages, the country is really very much expensive. And even in absolute terms, the times of Prague being a cheap city for tourists is long gone. But at the same time, Czechs still earn a third of, for example, a German salary. So the salaries are still very much Eastern European, while the living costs are not by a long shot. And that's something that the outgoing government, I think, has pretty much ignored or even downplayed. A great example of this is a video that the outgoing PM Fiala posted on his social networks a couple of months ago from the campaign trail, in which he basically claimed that people complaining about the high living costs are exaggerating and have nothing to fear. And such a level of ignorance coming from a guy in a really expensive suit, downplaying the legitimate fears and struggles of everyday people in Czechia who have been financially struggling, whose wage is definitely not enough in today's Czechia. And to hear the prime minister basically ignoring the struggles and telling those people who have been struggling, look, you have nothing to fear, you have nothing to complain about, that's utmost ignorance. And in my opinion, for that only, the outgoing government deserved to lose, because, if anything, just don't ignore the concerns that your voters have. So that's definitely the first and I think the most important reason. People just voted with their wallet, and Babiš promised them that they would be better off once again. And, let's not discuss whether or not his promises are grounded in economic reality. That's a whole other issue, and I don't think they are, but people just believed it more than they believed the outgoing government, and that's the main reason. Now, the third question is related to this one. It is quite simple on paper. Is Czech democracy in danger now that Babiš is back in power, and can he be compared to people like Orbán in Hungary or Fico in Slovakia? Now again, a really fundamental question, and thanks for asking. I understand why people would compare those three people, but I don't think it's so easy as to simply draw a parallel between them and say they're similar. It is much more complicated. Let's begin with Orbán. I think compared to Babiš, Orbán is definitely a much bigger ideologue than Babiš is. Orbán has been intent on turning Hungary into an illiberal democracy. He said it himself. That's why he's pushed through the very conservative and very illiberal constitutional amendments in Hungary, and that's why he's been, for example, curtailing the media and the civil society. It has been his declared mission to turn Hungary away from liberal democracy into a more authoritarian style of leadership. And that's also why the EU, for example, has launched a number of investigations into whether or not Hungary is still abiding by the fundamental EU norms and regulations. That's a recent video we posted. Do check it out for more detail. Just simply put now, Orbán has been trying to capture the entire Hungarian state for multiple reasons. It's his ideology, and also he's made himself and his closest allies so rich and powerful that it is in his inherent interest to capture the state so that he stays free and can remain in power unharmed, quite basically. Fico in Slovakia, in turn, has taken a more rash and sledge and hammer approach, I would say. He has been radicalized over the years and turned from a more or less normal social democrat in the early 2000s into a wannabe authoritarian. And I think there's two main reasons why that should have happened. First, in 2018, after the murder of journalist Jan Kuciak and his fiancée, he was forced to step down as prime minister. And as multiple accounts confirm, he sees it until this day as a power grab, as power being stolen from him. Ever since this, as he sees it, power grab, he's been intent on returning to power and securing his position so that he's never again forced to leave in the future. The second reason why he's radicalized so much was the assassination attempt on his life from last year. Now, don't get me wrong, it is fortunate and it is a good thing, definitely, that Fico survived the assassination attempt, and it was disgusting that it happened. But the fact that it did happen strengthened, I think, the feeling in him that people are out there to get him and again steal power from him. In his eyes, no matter if it reflects reality or not, this is part of a large conspiracy to steal power from him. Now, investigations into the assassination attempt have not proven any sort of large conspiracy. I wanted to put it out there. But Fico still believes it. And the result of all of this, since he returned to power in 2023, is a much harsher, more authoritarian style of rule. He is capturing the media, he is capturing the civil society, so that he's never again forced to leave his position. So in the end result, they are similar, Fico and Orbán, but the drivers behind their decisions to become more authoritarian are very different. Now, cut to Babiš in Czechia. I think Babiš is very different to both of them. First and foremost, Babiš is no ideologue whatsoever. He is mainly a pragmatist and leads a catch-all party, and as such, he is intent on really catching all the voters he can catch. And that also means appealing to a wide audience of different people who every single one of them naturally wants a slightly different thing. And to achieve this process of catching all voters inside his party, he sometimes has resorted to a much harsher and more aggressive rhetoric. For example, on the campaign trail ahead of the 2025 election, he was sometimes really harsh in relation to Ukraine. He ruled out any further support to Ukraine from the state budget. He said that the ammunition initiative, which we discussed before, would end under his government. And he also sometimes called Ukrainian refugees a bad thing in Czechia. Yes, that sounds harsh, because it is, but I think the main reason, unlike people like Orbán and Fico, is not that he would be opposed to having Ukrainians in Czechia. He needs them. The economy needs them, and also Babiš's own companies need those people. So he just needs to strengthen his rhetoric sometimes so that people who would otherwise vote for more extremist parties vote for him instead. What's dangerous, I think, is that even though Babiš is not an ideologue and doesn't, I think, want to be extreme, he might be forced to become much more extreme just because his voters demand him to be more extreme. Whether or not it happens, whether or not Babiš will become more extreme in his position as prime minister, that's left to be seen, but it's definitely danger. That said, I don't believe he will really take it to the absolute extreme and, for example, flirt with leaving the EU or even NATO. That's not going to happen, I think. For the very simple reason, if not anything else, that Babiš is selfish. He is one of the wealthiest people in Czechia, and all of his business interests lie in the West only. Except for Slovakia, he doesn't have any single business interest in the East. And that's why he would want to see the door to the EU, NATO, and first and foremost, the single market open, because he wants to see his own wealth and his own business's profit. Next question, a really interesting one as well. Jan Masaryk, former Czechoslovak foreign minister, wanted Czechoslovakia to be a bridge between the West and the East at the start of the Cold War. Is this philosophy still relevant today? Now, the question is really fascinating. I'm afraid we don't have time to cover it all, but very briefly, this idea that Czechoslovakia would become a bridge between the West and the East was quite simply born out of the Munich Agreement in September 1938, where Czechoslovakia's allies, UK and France, forced Czechoslovakia to give up 20% of its territory to Hitler and basically betrayed Czechoslovakia and ignored the alliance that they officially had. So after the war, to basically ensure the country against any possible future aggression, for example, from Germany, mainly Czechoslovak President Edvard Beneš pushed for this so-called East and West bridge strategy. His main premise was basically that after the war, the West would be forced to become much more socialist, not least because the population in the West was struggling after the war, and so they would need social measures to keep people afloat, whereas the Soviet Union in the East would be forced to become much more democratic over time because, for example, they would want to participate in international trade, and for that to happen, Beneš hoped that the Soviets would become more democratic. And as a result, Beneš believed that the two sides would simply converge, and Czechoslovakia would be there, quite literally in the middle of Europe, to act as a connector between the two camps. Sounds good on paper, I guess, but we all know, if we know a bit about history, that it didn't work out and that it failed spectacularly. A great example of this failure is actually Czechoslovakia itself. See, the country after the war wanted to stay democratic, but also become much more socialist, as Beneš said. And for that, they basically banned all the traditional democratic parties from participating in the first post-war election in 1946. They hoped that this would, among others, appease the Soviets. But still, because they wanted to be in the West as well, Czechoslovakia, for example, planned to accept the US Marshall Plan to help economic recovery in the country. And that's where the main issue comes in, actually. Because in July 1947, just as Czechoslovakia was planning to accept the Marshall Plan, Stalin himself summoned the Czech government, including Jan Masaryk, foreign minister, into Moscow and basically forced the Czechoslovak government to refuse the Marshall Plan. Masaryk himself later famously said that he went to Moscow as a Czechoslovak minister but returned as Stalin's servant. And that basically was the end of the bridge policy because, the Soviets simply didn't allow Czechoslovakia to function as a bridge. And tragically, Masaryk himself later fell victim, quite literally, to the policy because in 1948, shortly after the communist coup in Czechoslovakia, his body was found under his window at the Czechoslovak Foreign Ministry. It's not clear until this day, by the way, how exactly he died, but there's a strong suspicion that KGB agents of the Soviets actually killed him because he was seen as the democratic force in the government. He was also the son of the founder of democratic Czechoslovakia, Tomáš Garrigue Masaryk, and so the Soviets needed to get rid of him. That's how the policy of the bridge between the West and the East died completely. And in today's Czechia, the refusal of the bridge strategy is actually one of the cornerstones of Czechia's foreign policy. Basically, every single modern democratic party, no matter if they're on the left or the right, if they're democratic, they refuse to be anywhere close to Russia simply because we've had our experience with the Russians. And they want to stay firmly anchored in Western structures. Czechia is a full member of NATO and the EU, and every single serious political force wants it to remain that way. Yes, there are some fringes who still flirt with Czechia leaving those structures, most famously the communists, but fortunately for all of us, the commies didn't make it into parliament in the recent Czech election, and even Andrej Babiš himself, who is most likely to lead the next Czech government, has firmly refused even talking about leaving either the EU or NATO. So in terms of the geopolitical orientation, I think fortunately Czechia is quite secure in its place in the West. Then we have another question. The plastic people of the universe. What are their thoughts about new digital speech restrictions and the revolution 30 plus years later? That's a really interesting question, really specific one. So very briefly, the Plastic People of the Universe, or PPU, were a really well-known underground rock band in Czechoslovakia, active mainly in the 70s and 80s. And because they were underground rock and sang in English, they were really non-conformist. It also means that, of course, the communist regime didn't really like them, and they faced heavy persecutions that also included the fans of the rock band. There were several incidents where PPU members and fans were severely beaten up by the Czechoslovak authorities. And the first thing that needs to be said is that basically since the revolution, the band members don't really comment on current politics. So to answer this particular question will be difficult. But if I were to guess from what we know about the band, and that's pure speculation, of course, but I think they would be against any sort of limitation to free speech. At the same time, I really can't see them being okay with, for example, unrestricted access to open Russian propaganda and lies from the Kremlin. But that's just me guessing. We simply don't know because the band members are not really politically active, and they've never really been politically active per se. They were just, arguing for freedom. And by all accounts, Central Europe is free, luckily. So bands like PPU would be very much free to perform. And then we have the last question. Can Hungary bring peace to Ukraine with the planned summit between Trump and Putin in Budapest? Interesting. The short answer, I believe, is no. And I think there's two main reasons. First, and the key reason is definitely the fact that I think Putin doesn't really want peace in Ukraine. Yes, he might claim that he's open to negotiation, but if anything, I think he's only playing Trump. And we've seen time and again that it's quite easy to play him. And the reason why Putin has played Trump again is that I think he was genuinely afraid that Trump might cave in and send a long-range cruise missiles, the Tomahawks, to Ukraine. And that would be a serious risk to the Kremlin. So in order to stall Trump and prevent that he sends anything of value to the Ukrainians. And we know, by the way, that Putin is not serious because just a few hours ago, he again repeated his nonsensical demand that in order for him to even consider peace in Ukraine, Ukrainians should leave the entire Donbass, including regions where Russian soldiers have never been and never occupied, and still Putin wants Ukraine to leave those areas. Coincidentally, those are the areas in which Ukraine has built serious fortifications. One of the most important defensive lines are located in the areas of the Donbass that Putin was never able to get, simply because those fortifications are that massive. And Putin now wants Ukraine to leave them. I think he knows that Zelensky will never agree to this. Quite simply, you cannot trust anything the Kremlin promises. Its promises are not worth the paper that they are written on. And if, hypothetically, Ukraine left those massive fortifications, what is there to stop Putin to relaunch the offensive a few days, months later, and conquer new areas in Ukraine? So Putin knows that Ukraine needs to say no, and that's why the peace will not happen. That was the first reason. And the second reason why Orbán cannot bring peace to Ukraine is simply because even though Orbán would like us all to believe that he's neutral in the conflict, he's gone to the Kremlin multiple times and apparently is good friends with the dictator in the Kremlin, Hungary is still a full member of the EU and NATO. And no matter how Putin behaves, no matter how much close he claims to be with Orbán, the fact is that Hungary is still a EU member, a NATO member, and as part of the West, there will never be a credible negotiation partner. There will never be a credible negotiation partner for Ukraine either, because Orbán has been doing everything in his power to basically betray Ukraine. They've not helped the country militarily at all. Orbán has flirted with Putin multiple times. There's even accusations of Hungary actively spying against Ukraine rather than helping them. So even for the Ukrainians, Hungary is not credible. And for that reason, just because they are not credible for either of the parties in the conflict, they will never be able to achieve anything substantial, not to mention peace. It's not going to happen. Okay. And I think that was the last question. So we'll conclude it there. Thank you again, everyone that submitted their questions. Please keep on doing that, either in the comments of any video that I post, or you can get in touch with me anytime. You know where to find me. I will be happy to answer your questions either in the comments or in a separate video. There's definitely going to be another Q&A video when I collect interesting questions again. So do make sure that you ask whatever you want to see discussed. And as I said, if you have anything to add to what I've just said, feel free to drop a comment anytime, and let's keep the discussion going. Once again, a huge thanks to everyone liking the video, subscribing to the channel, and a massive thank you to those of you supporting me on herohero.co/ParkPulse. You are the ones making all this possible and giving me the energy to keep going. Thanks again. This has been Jan. See you next time.